Hello, and welcome to the To Be Like Christ Bible Study podcast, where we explore and explain one chapter of the Bible at a time. My name is Luke, and I am thy host. And today's chapter is Genesis 28. Let's go ahead and read the text together. I'm going to be reading from the English Standard Version of the Bible as always. And while I find it in my Bible, if you have a moment, hit the subscribe button on your podcast player so we can study together again sometime. Genesis 28 is a little bit shorter than some of our previous chapters. There's a total of 22 verses to read today. Let's go ahead and get into the text. Then Isaac called Jacob and blessed him and directed him, "You must not take a wife from the Canaanite women. Arise, go to Padan Aram to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father, and take as your wife from there one of the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and multiply you, that you may become a company of peoples. May he give the blessings of Abraham to you and to your offspring with you, that you may take possession of the land of your sojournings that God gave to Abraham." Thus Isaac sent Jacob away, and he went to Padan Aram, to Laban, the son of Bethuel, the Aramean, the brother of Rebekah, Jacob's and Esau's mother. Now Esau saw that Isaac had blessed Jacob and sent him away to Padan Aram to take a wife from there, and that as he blessed him, he directed him, "You must not take a wife from the Canaanite women," and that Jacob had obeyed his father and his mother and gone to Padan Aram. So when Esau saw that the Canaanite women did not please Isaac his father, Esau went to Ishmael and took as his wife, besides the wives he had, Mahalath, the daughter of Ishmael, Abraham's son, the sister of Nebaioth. Jacob left Beersheba and went towards Haran, and he came to a certain place and stayed there that night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place to sleep. And he dreamed, and behold, there was a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, "I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and to your offspring. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. And in you and your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Behold, I am with you, and I will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you." Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it." And he was afraid and said, "How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven." So early in the morning, Jacob took the stone that he had put under his head and set it up for a pillar and poured oil on the top of it. He called the name of that place Bethel, but the name of the city was Luz at the first. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, "If God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God, and this stone which I have set up for a pillar shall be God's house. And of all that you give me, I will give a full tenth to you." Welcome back, everybody, to our Bible study. Today we're opening the pages of Genesis chapter 28, and we are discovering the story of Jacob and what's going to happen to Jacob. So you remember, there's a lot of tension in the house of Isaac and Rebekah. There was tension between them because they had different favorite children. They had different favorite children. Jacob was Rebekah's favorite child, and Esau was Isaac's favorite child. We talked about how Jacob was a man who would take advantage of a situation if he could, and we see that in him taking advantage of the situation with his brother, who's starving after coming back from an unsuccessful hunt, and he gets his brother to sell him his birthright for a bowl of stew. Now, Esau was stupid for selling him his birthright, but Jacob really shouldn't have asked him for it in the first place, I don't think. That's a second source of tension in this family. In the previous chapter, we talked about another one, and that's how Jacob and Rebekah scheme to lie to Isaac to steal the blessing from Esau also. So Jacob's already got his birthright, but now he wants this verbal sacred blessing that's supposed to be spoken over the firstborn son. Well, that's supposed to go to Esau, but you remember Rebekah and Jacob, they cook up a couple goats and they put the goat skins on Jacob's hands and on his neck. And he goes into his father, who's nearly blind at this point, and he says, "Oh, it's me, Esau. I'm here to receive my blessing." And he gets Isaac to believe him that he is actually Esau. And Isaac speaks this blessing over Jacob when in fact it was supposed to go to Esau. And so Esau's so mad about him now losing his birthright and now losing the blessing that he is scheming to kill Jacob. But at the end of the last chapter, Rebekah decides that she needs to send Jacob away to her brother Laban's house, way up north, about 500 miles to the north, in a place called Haran in Padan Aram. And that's going to save him. And so she presents this to Isaac as if she doesn't want Jacob marrying a Canaanite woman or a Hittite woman like Esau had done. That had brought a lot of bitterness into their household. So she says, in part to get Jacob a wife, but really, I think the motive behind it was to help Jacob escape from his brother's murderous intentions. She says to Isaac, "Let's send Jacob up north to my brother so that he can find a wife up there and not marry a Canaanite." So he is going to get a wife up there, and that'll be a good thing, and he's also going to escape his brother's wrath. But this left us with a question at the end of chapter 27, and that was, wait a second, I thought Jacob wasn't supposed to leave this promised land. God had promised to give Abraham and Isaac and Jacob the land of Canaan as their inheritance. And so now Jacob's leaving, and he's going all the way up north. Is he going to come back? How's God going to fulfill his promises through him if he's 500 miles up north completely in the wrong place? Well, we're going to talk about that a little bit more in this chapter, and those questions are going to be answered as we progress through the book of Genesis. So today we're going to talk about Jacob's journey and God appearing to him on this journey to the north. Of course, if you would like, you can download our PDF that has all the key information that I'm reading off of on our website at tobelikechrist.com. It's totally free, all 50 chapters. If you would like all 50 chapters nicely arranged for you in a book, you can buy one on Amazon. Just search for Genesis to Be Like Christ, and it's our 5-minute Bible study book. These are the same outlines that we use for our video 5-minute studies on YouTube every day. We've got a lot of dates in our timeline section. This is always the first section that we cover. There's a bunch of dates on the PDF, but I'm just going to go over and try to make this as simple as possible. Using some details in the upcoming chapters that we haven't read yet, it seems safe to say that the events that are recorded here in Genesis chapter 28 took place between the years 1816 and 1757 BC. Now, to clarify that a little bit more, that would have been about between Isaac's 80th year of life and his 135th year of life. And it's almost certainly towards the beginning of that period. So I'm guessing here, speculating a little bit, that Isaac's a little bit older than 80 years old when the events of 28 are playing out. And that would put Jacob and Esau in their 20s, maybe their 30s. You'll know if you've ever tried to date some of the events of the early Bible, it can be quite challenging. We get a lot more clarity as we progress through the scriptures, but some of these earlier dates are heavily debated, and if you go online, you will see other timelines that other people have put together based on their assessment of the facts. There is some debate, even amongst honest Bible scholars and educated people. So you'll see differing timelines, and eventually you just have to kind of choose one and go with it and try to fit all of the facts that we have in the Bible into that particular timeline that you're using. I think I have the best timeline, not because I put it together, but because some other really smart people put it together, and it seems to match the biblical history as I've gone through the Old Testament. But if you want to, you can definitely go out online and see some dates that other people propose. Now, let's make sure that we're familiar with all of our key characters for today. We have Isaac, who is Abraham's son. He is the husband of Rebekah. And then we have Rebekah. She's Isaac's wife and the mother of twins, Jacob and Esau. And we have Esau. He's the firstborn of Isaac. He's a very skillful hunter, and he's the favorite child of Isaac. We have Jacob. He is the younger brother, and he is the favorite child of Rebekah. In Genesis chapter 27, remember, he stole his brother's blessing, and his brother's not too happy with him as we open up chapter 28. And then we have Laban, who we were briefly introduced to Laban when we read the story of Abraham's servant going up to Haran to find a wife for Isaac. That's when he brings Rebekah back down to Canaan, and Isaac and Rebekah get married. When he's up there, he meets Bethuel, who's Rebekah's father, but he also meets Laban, who's Rebekah's brother. And he's going to re-enter the story as we read further into Jacob's story. For our map today, our where section, our map is expanding back out again. From Genesis chapter 28, verse 10, it appears that Isaac and Esau and Jacob lived in Beersheba as this chapter opens. Jacob then departs from Beersheba, because he's going up north to find a wife, and he stops at Bethel before continuing on. Bethel is not too far to the northeast of Beersheba. It's on the beginning of his journey up to Haran, and so he goes from Beersheba, he makes a quick stop at Bethel where he spends the night, and then he's got a long journey ahead of him. From Beersheba to Haran is about 500 to 550 miles. All right, so now we can break our chapter down, break it down into sections, and make sure that we comprehend what we just read. This chapter only having 22 verses, I've just got 3 sections today. The first one is verses 1 through 5. We see Isaac sending Jacob to Haran. So this plan was devised by Rebekah and suggested by Rebekah at the end of the last chapter. And part of the reason that she doesn't want Jacob marrying a Canaanite woman is because Esau married some Hittite women, some Canaanite women, and they have been a source of bitterness to the family. As we've talked about, that's probably because they don't share the same values of Isaac and Rebekah's family. They may not worship the same God as Isaac and Rebekah's family. Their customs may be completely different, especially considering Abraham and Sarah, who would have instilled their customs in Isaac and Rebekah. They came from like the other side of the world practically. You know, when you're thinking about where they originated from, Ur of the Chaldees, which was hundreds and hundreds of miles away, their customs were probably very different than these Canaanite people whose land they had moved into. So Rebekah says, I don't want Jacob marrying a woman like his brother married, and so we're going to send him up north to my brother Laban, and he can find a wife there. And obviously we mentioned that she also does this, maybe the greatest motivation is because she's trying to help Jacob escape from Esau, who now wants to kill him for stealing his blessing. We don't know exactly how long it was between Jacob stealing the blessing and him being sent away to Haran. But one thing that's really interesting is that Isaac blesses Jacob when this happens. So he blesses him and he asks the Lord to fulfill his promises to Abraham through Jacob and through his descendants. So we see, I don't know if this is forgiveness or Isaac's just being kind here, but even though Jacob deceived him and lied to him and stealed what belonged to his brother, Isaac still blesses Jacob, maybe knowing that he is going to be the representative through whom God fulfills his promises. We don't know exactly what Isaac's thoughts on Esau were, if Esau was also going to help fulfill those promises. We're not told how much Isaac knew about that, but he does know, and he prays and blesses Jacob before he leaves and asks God to fulfill his promises through him. So we see, I guess, a bit of forgiveness on behalf of Isaac being willing to give this blessing even after his son lied to him. Jacob was instructed to go to this area known as Padan Aram, or to Haran, to the house of Laban, who was Rebekah's brother. We mentioned that, and he was supposed to find a wife there. And then Rebekah had promised him in the last chapter that if he goes up here, she will call him back to Canaan when his brother's anger subsides, when Esau's anger subsides. How long that will take, who knows? Will she fulfill that promise? Who knows? We don't know at this point. But she just tells him to go away until his brother decides to not murder him. So that would be good. We now come to verse 6 through 9, which is our second section. This is really interesting. We see Esau marrying a woman named Mahalath. I think that's right. Esau had previously married 2 Canaanite women, which we've mentioned several times now, Judith and Basemath. Specifically, they were from the nation of the Hittites. When he sees Jacob being sent away by his parents. And when he sees that Isaac and Rebekah dislike his Canaanite wives, Esau decides to take another wife, Mahalath. This is one of the children of Ishmael. It says that he goes to Ishmael, so Ishmael evidently is still alive at this point. We talked about his death, but I think that was projecting forward into the future. Talked about that in a previous chapter, but he's still alive at this point, and so Esau goes to Ishmael, and he asks to marry one of his daughters, and it seems like Esau's intention here is that, well, maybe if I marry somebody within the family, that my parents will, I'll get on my parents' good side. Here they're blessing Jacob as he's going away. Maybe they'll bless me as well if I go ahead and marry somebody within the family. It's interesting that we don't see Jacob being sent to Ishmael's house to find a wife. Instead, we see him being sent all the way up north to Laban's house, and it's only Esau who marries into the family of Ishmael. And this further kind of separates Ishmael and those involved with his family, including Esau, separates them from being the recipients and the fulfillers of the promises that were made to Abraham. What we're going to find out is that Esau and his family are not going to be involved in the fulfilling of these promises, so he kind of sets himself aside and positions himself in association with Esau, which positions him apart from the line of promise. But it seems that in the short term, he's thinking that maybe his parents will love him a little bit more if he takes a wife that they're a little bit more pleased with. So that's section number 2, verses 6 through 9. Now we go to our final and third section, Jacob's dream and the ladder to heaven. This is verses 10 through 22. So Jacob departs from Beersheba, he departs from his parents and from his brother, and he begins this long journey to Haran. And of course, there's these questions that we still have about, well, is he going to come back? How is God going to fulfill his promises if he's going to live up in Haran? We're going to get some of the answers to that relatively quickly as Jacob sets out on this journey. He comes to what the Bible calls a, quote, certain place and laid down to sleep, and he used a stone for a pillow. I haven't tried that, but I don't know why that would be more comfortable than just laying your head on the grass. But this is Jacob's preference. He uses a stone for his pillow. And that night, he dreams of a ladder that stretches all the way from the earth to heaven. And on this ladder, he sees angels of God, ascending and descending up and down the ladder. And the Lord is standing above the ladder at the top, and he tells Jacob that his children are going to be numerous as the dust of the earth, and that all nations of the earth are going to be blessed through them. So God is standing at the top of the ladder, reaffirming the promises that he's made to Abraham, and then he made to Isaac, and now he's reaffirming those promises to Jacob. So there's clarity that these promises are going to be fulfilled through his line and through his family. God then promises to be with Jacob on his journey, and, here's a key detail, to eventually bring him back to Canaan. So he's going to be coming back, and God is going to ensure that he makes it back. That's going to take several years, as we will find out, but it is going to happen eventually. There's a couple things I want to mention before we move on past this dream. This is a really interesting and significant point in Jacob's life. And the first thing that I want to mention is that once again, we see it reaffirmed that God doesn't necessarily choose people because they're the holiest or they're the best at keeping all of his commands and they're the most righteous and the most pious. Jacob at this point, as far as what we know about him, he's not a particularly good guy, right? He takes advantage of his brother to take his birthright, and then he lies to his old blind father to steal the blessing that didn't belong to him and belonged to his brother. So that's pretty much what we know about Jacob. and yet we see God choosing him to be the one that he works through. So again, this isn't a story necessarily about how all these men were so faithful and so good all the time and how God was able to work through them because they were just so righteous. No, it's a story about God's power working on earth, not necessarily about men who we should be idolizing for their holiness. When we look at these stories, we need to be observing and admiring the holy God, not the imperfect men that he's using. The second point of discussion that I wanted to bring up about this text is this ladder. and what it means. I think the first thing maybe to mention is that we're not given an exact meaning of this and why God presented himself to Jacob in this particular way. We're not told that in the text. This dream is not, we're not told exactly what all the elements of this dream mean and why God previously spoke to Abraham and Isaac and reaffirmed these promises, and they didn't have a vision of a ladder. So why does God present it in this way when talking to Jacob? And while we can't know for sure, I've read into it a little bit and I've found some interesting interpretations of the dream, and I thought I would present them just for your thoughts and maybe your discussion over this text with people that you're studying with. The first interpretation I heard was that the ladder from the earth to the heaven represents God's work on earth. That there's a bridge, there's a connection between God in heaven and these people like Jacob on earth. And the angels who are coming up and down the stairs, the steps of this ladder, they represent God's control and God's step-by-step providence of bringing about events on earth in the order that he wants them to be brought about. He's working step by step in the life of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's working step by step through his messengers all over the earth to bring about all kinds of things. So some people think that that's what the ladder represents, is God's providential work through his angels, through his servants, and the connection that exists between earth and heaven. These two things are not separated. God is not absent. He is very connected to what's going on here. And of course, that's evident in the stories that we're reading. The second interpretation that I heard is similar to this one, but relates specifically to one aspect of the promise that's made to Jacob, and that's the aspect that all nations of the earth are going to be blessed through his descendants. And that's repeated to him here as it was repeated to Abraham and to Isaac. We've talked about how that's going to happen through Jesus eventually, who dies and gives grace to the entire world and brings salvation to the earth, salvation from sin, the problem that was introduced back in Genesis chapter 3. So God is going to bring that about, and he's going to bring that about by bridging the gap between heaven and earth. And he's going to bridge that gap with a mediator, with someone who steps down from heaven, comes to the earth, and repairs the relationship between men and God. And that is Jesus. And so when we talk about all nations of the earth being blessed through Jacob's descendants, we're talking about one day there being a bridge of reconciliation between sinful men and a perfectly holy God. And that bridge is the blood of Jesus. And so some people see the ladder as a foreshadowing of that bridge being created. So now that we've discussed those two things, let's go ahead and return to our text. We see Jacob responding as I think any of us would. Jacob is stunned by what he sees, and he declares, quote, "This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven." In the morning, Jacob makes a pillar of the stone that he had rested his head on, and he anoints it with oil, similar to what we see in other Bible figures building altars. He names the location Bethel. And he makes a vow there at Bethel now that the Lord has appeared to him. He vowed that he would worship the God of his father Abraham if God would keep him safe and keep this promise to return him to Canaan one day. He says, if the Lord fulfills this promise, then he will be my God. And we're going to see whether or not God fulfills that promise in Jacob's life and eventually brings him back to Canaan. If you've ever read the Bible before, you know God doesn't break any of his promises. So that tells you what's going to happen. But how does that work out? That's what we're going to be discussing in upcoming chapters. So I think that will do it for our summary of Genesis chapter 28 today. The last section of our PDF is an application section where we try to take what we've observed in the text and then make an application for us. What can we learn from this? How can this strengthen our walk with the Lord today? Here's the application that I've come up with. When you're confident that the Lord is watching over you, it makes it easier to step out into the unknown. Jacob was about to make a 500-plus mile journey to a land, Haran, that he had never seen. Yeah, he's going. We don't know if he's alone, but he seems to be alone. And he's supposed to go, to this place that he's not familiar with. He's never been there before. He has no idea what he's going to encounter on this long journey and on the road. He's just going. No doubt, though, the Lord, giving him these promises to protect him, brought him a lot of comfort. Jacob now knows that not only is he going to make it to Haran, but he's also going to make it back. And God's going to ensure that. And the application for us is that we are not without the promises of God. We also have promises that God is going to be with us. We all face situations where the future is uncertain. And sometimes, as servants of God, God calls us into things that scare us. He calls us down roads that maybe we don't want to go or we never anticipated having to go. But we can face the future with confidence, knowing that the Lord is always with his children. And he's promised this. He's promised this to us in the scriptures that he's given to us. God has reassured us that he will never leave us or forsake us. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 5. So let's step confidently into whatever the future holds, knowing that God is already there and he's going to meet us when we get there. That's our study for today. Thank you, everybody, for joining me again. And Lord willing, we will be back tomorrow to discuss chapter 29 and to discuss the story of Jacob and the adventure that he's on a little bit further. Until then, I hope you have a fantastic day. Thanks for listening.